Hi everyone, thanks very much for that introduction. So as Isabel says, I'm Kirsten Dunne, Senior Projects Conservator. I used to be a paper conservator, but now I look after microfading, our time-based media collection, and also looking at applications of technology to our collection and work. So I'm going to talk to you today about microfading. I'm going to give you a really brief overview of what microfading is, and also an example of how we've been using it within the Conservation Department to have better conversations around light exposure and risk for our collection. Next, please. So what is a microfader? Well, a microfader is a piece of equipment that allows the rapid, non-destructive testing or the relative light sensitivity of an object. It's a mouthful of a sentence. It's a risk management tool. So it's an accelerated light aging technique which is carried out on a micro scale, and it's based on testing objects themselves as opposed to mock-ups of objects. The light source that we're using in our case is an 80-watt xenon light bulb, which is filtered for UV and IR. So it's about trying to replicate display conditions. And we are testing only with the visible portion of the spectrum. So we're looking for those items that are deemed highly light sensitive. So they're going to react to display in visible light, not just react to UV light. Next slide, please. So this is a sort of diagrammatic layout of our kit. Microfading's been around since the late 1990s when it was developed by Dr. Paul Whitmore. And I've been using our microfader on the NGS collection and also working for external clients since about 2012. I'm one of around 50 users worldwide. That number's changing and growing all the time. Some really early adopters of the technology included the Getty and the CCI, the Met have one, I think, in New York. National Museum of Australia have done some incredible work with microfading, and they're now also users in Denmark, Singapore, and New Zealand. So the numbers are growing all the time. Next, please. So to give you a sense, the kit here is me working on one of our collection items. The kit isn't massive, as you can see. You build it yourself. It is actually portable, although you do need a very stable surface to work on. It can be used on both 2- and 3-dimensional objects and can test most things that are coloured, with a few exceptions, but you can get data on most things. The measuring head, which is the black thing sat in front of me here with a little round red circle on it, sits about 1 centimetre away from the object you're testing, so it's non-contact, and the spot size instant onto the object is about 0.2 to 0.4 of a millimetre in diameter. And the idea is that you test each colour on your object, and each fade test or run lasts about 10 minutes, so quite rapidly you can get some quite interesting information. So what we look at when we're carrying out a test is how fast the coloured material being tested is changing, and this is key to undertaking the test safely, watching that rate of change. And we're also looking at where in the visible light reflectance spectra this change is occurring. We measure this rate of change against the relative scale, and the scale we're currently using is the blue wall scale. So the microfader can distinguish between blue walls 1 to about 1 to 3, 1 to 4, so those objects are often grouped together in terminology as being highly light sensitive. Working with the results provided, you can then start to provide advice on light budgets and levels to hopefully help manage colour change or fading accordingly. So to stress the point, this isn't an analytical tool and it's not about absolutes, nor was it designed as such. It's a risk management tool that allows you to sort the collection or items that you're working with into categories of light sensitivity. So it's about knowing where and when to worry. Next slide, please. So the data you get is itself meaningless unless you can apply it to a lighting policy for the objects you're working with. So on screen is a portion of the lighting policy that we currently have at NGS, and this is how we use this to apply our microfader results to light management. So what you're doing is accepting that light-induced change is going to happen. You're finding out, well, you're taking an acceptable amount of change, and you're spreading it out over a lifespan to give you a light budget. So one of the many interesting conversations use of a microfader instigates is what is an acceptable lifespan for your collection or the objects that you're working with. I mean, everything has a lifespan, we know this, but it's interesting, we don't often say it out loud or give it a numerical value, and that's crucial when you're microfading. Next slide, please. So for me, the most useful thing that microfading does is, or has done for us at NGS, is opened up conversations between conservators and our curatorial colleagues, and have changed the dynamic of these conversations. So we're quite a traditional organisation in terms of light management, and we've been able to move from a sort of conservator says no stance to have much more nuanced, interesting and productive conversations that are centred on risk for individual objects and focused on managing that risk, and also finding practical solutions to help us do that so we can improve access and display, which is what this largely does. So an example on screen really briefly is a Paul Klee print that was requested for a touring exhibition. I tested it with a microfader. The main area of coloured print came back with a recommended light budget of about 3 years per decade, which is pretty good for a work on paper. But there was a tiny inscription underneath the image, which was added by the artist and is highly significant. And the recommended light budget for that was 8 months per decade. So very limiting in terms of display, particularly in terms of extended loan. So simple solution, we covered it with window mount and it could go on display. Next slide, please. And that's it. That was a really quick introduction. Thank you for listening, and I'm always happy to answer questions.